The next lecture after that will be after the summer. The August 29th will be Dan Peterson talking about the ecumenical councils. So let me, well, first of all, we've got to pick up our Turkish language lesson where we left off. If you weren't with us last time, you'll have to move twice as fast. We learned one word last time. We'll learn one more tonight. So do you remember? Does anybody remember the word we learned? What was it? Turkey. Oh, so you got a third word. That's good. Okay, Turkey is how they pronounce the word, the name of the country now, Turkey. Merhaba. Okay, merhaba is hello. Okay. Merhaba. Okay, good. So now at the end of our lecture tonight, we'll tell Christine thank you. You say teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler.
It's amazing. Teşekkürler.
Right.
And Christine actually knows Turkish, so she can tell you the right way to pronounce it, but that's the way I pronounce it. And I am so excited to hear from Professor Isom-Verhaaren tonight. Christine Isom-Verhaaren is an assistant professor of history at Brigham Young University, where she teaches courses in the history of Ottoman Empire, Middle Eastern history, and world civilization. She received her PhD in 1997 from the University of Chicago and has taught history and global studies at Benedictine University in Illinois. And she's the author of, among many other publications, The Allies with the Infidels, the Ottoman-French Alliance in the 16th Century, Living in the Ottoman Realm, Empire and Identity, 13th to 20th centuries, and most recently, The Sultan's Fleet, Seafarers of the Ottoman Empire. So this is a world-renowned expert on the Ottoman Empire, and so I'm excited to hear from her. Please join me in welcoming.
I'm very happy to be here. I always love to talk about the Ottoman Empire. So I'm basically going to do like 900 years of history in like 50 minutes. So I'm going to suggest that we probably do questions at the end. So if you have questions, try and remember them and then ask them at the end. So the technology here is pretty impressive. So let's get going. So I am talking about the Ottoman Empire, and this is a Turkish dynasty, and it rules the Middle East for a very long time, from 1300 to 1923. And so, people will be like, why did you study such an obscure topic? I'm like, well, actually, it's a pretty major topic, as you will find out here. So you already heard about my books, but I love the covers, and so I brought copies because I do love my covers. They're taken from Ottoman manuscripts, so these are Ottoman art that you see here. And not only are they beautiful, they are very important. This is one of the events that this book talks about, and this is one of the events that this book talks about. So you can judge a book by the cover sometimes. So as you know, I'm a professor at BYU, and this is a picture of me team teaching with my son, Christopher Verhaaren, who's a physicist. We team taught a class last semester, the destruction of the atom and the creation of modern society. So it's kind of fun to be able to team teach with your son. It doesn't get much better than that. So that's kind of a little bit about who I am. And now we're going to talk about Turks. So Turks in Turkey, there were no Turks in Turkey before 1071 when a Turkish dynasty, the Seljuks, defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert. And this puts a lot of events in motion. Not only does it put a lot of Turks who move into this area of the world that's now known as Turkey, it also 25 years later, you get the First Crusade. So this is all pretty much related. And if you look at this map, you can see Nicaea on the map, and I'm sure you're going to hear about councils at Nicaea. The modern name of this is Iznik, and the Seljuks of Rome, and I'll explain that in a minute, had their first capital at Nicaea, which you see is very close to Constantinople. until the First Crusade. And when the Crusaders arrived, they made a deal with the Byzantines, and then they moved their capital to Konya, which is also the biblical Iconium. So this gives you an idea of the areas we are talking about here today. So I really love maps. So we have another map here, and we have the Seljuks of Asia Minor or Anatolia or Rome. And I'm sure you learned last time that the Byzantines were basically the Eastern Roman Empire. And so when you hear the Seljuks of Rome, it's the Seljuks of Rome is what it is. And so they rule a kind of a big chunk of central Turkey. Their literary language was Persian. Turkish was not used for writing yet. And a very famous poet, Rumi, if you've ever heard of Rumi, he lived during this time, and he is called Rumi because he was from Rum, R-U-M. Okay. There was a lot of intermarriage between the Turks and the Byzantines on the dynastic level, and presumably on other levels as well. Rumi, he was Muslim, so he had more than one wife, but one of his wives was Christian and never converted to Islam. And so it gives you an idea of how very cosmopolitan this area of the world is. So the Seljuks, the main Seljuk dynasty, ruled in Iran and Iraq, and their poor relations ruled in Asia Minor or Anatolia. But they kind of disappear from the scene, and no one knows exactly what happens to them. And we have a lot of small Turkish dynasties that move in the end of the 1200s. And like, does this show when I do this? Yeah, great. Okay, so the Osman Ulara are the Ottomans. And so they start out as this little dynasty right here, and then they start taking over territories from their neighbors, and they take over territories from a lot of their Turkish neighbors, and then they take over a lot of Byzantine territories as well. But they start out as one of many small principalities, and the Turkish word for principality is beylik. So a bey is like a prince. Okay, and so we talk about the Ottoman Empire starting in 1300, but they really aren't an empire in 1300, right? They're this little principality here. But here's a map that shows their expansion, and this is really important to see because, yes, they start out from this little territory here, and then they move over here, and then you see they start expanding in the Balkans or European territories just as early as they start expanding in Anatolia. And you sort of see this, this expansion that's happening in both areas pretty much simultaneously from the beginnings here, but then a lot of expansion into southeastern Europe. And this happens very early on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about various rulers of the Ottomans as a way of talking about the history and explaining this. But eventually you'll see that the Ottomans conquer Constantinople, they conquer Syria and Egypt, can I go back, please? Most of North Africa, Iraq, all around the Black Sea, including the Crimea. So, who does the Crimea really belong to? It's the Ottomans, of course. And up into Hungary, and almost conquered Vienna twice. So gives you an idea. So when people would say to me, why do you study such an obscure topic? I'm like, well, this was the largest empire in the West after the Roman Empire. So, a major empire that lasted 600 years. I guess it's a major topic. So, all right. So we're going to start with the founder, Osman. And because English transliterates in a strange way, we get Ottoman out of that. So, And his reign is basically starting, 1299, 1300. And he founds the dynasty. And we don't really have a lot of good records from this period. So we have a lot of myths. And so we have this dream legend that he's staying with a Sufi. Do people know what Sufis are? Islamic mystics. He's staying at Edebali's Sufi lodge, and he has this dream that this tree grows out of his chest, and then it spreads and covers the whole world. And so he asks Edebali, well, what does this mean? And Edebali means, well, it means your dynasty is going to be the ruler of the world, and would you like to marry my daughter? So So there is this idea that the Ottomans were very motivated by religion when they first founded their principality. But in fact, they had a lot of Christians in their armies as well as Muslims. So that seems to be like religion was probably not the main motivation. But you will hear the term Ghazi as a warrior for the faith kind of idea. The main city they conquered during the reign of Osman was Bursa. I don't know if you're going to Bursa. Too bad, but it's a great city, very famous for trade. So Osman's son was Orhan, and he's the one who really puts the Ottomans on the map. And they conquer Iznik in 1331. Iznik is Nicaea. And because the Ottomans are really this up-and-coming dynasty, they end up marrying, Orhan ends up marrying among his wives, Theodora, the daughter of John V Cantacuzene, the Byzantine emperor. And so once again, you see that this idea of intermarriage, close relationships between the Turks and the other groups that are living in this area is something that's very common. The most important conquest, in my opinion, but this goes to deal with my naval perspective, is Gallipoli, which is conquered after a major earthquake. And so when we had the earthquakes, and I'm not laughing because of the earthquakes, but it made me realize if you have some major disaster like this, where the walls of some city are knocked down, which is what apparently happened here, then it's easy for other groups to move in and to take over that area. And Gallipoli has been a major strategic location from the time of the Golden Fleece up to the present, as a matter of fact. So Orhan's son was Murad I, and we get a lot of Turkish migration into the Balkans during this period, and we get the foundation of a very famous group of soldiers in the Ottoman Empire known as the Janissaries, who were considered to be very key to Ottoman military success. And Murad had a lot of vassals. They had Christian vassals, he had Turkish vassals. He defeats the Serbs at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. And so Serbia becomes part of the Ottoman Empire at this point. He is succeeded by his son Bayezid I, who is a very controversial ruler. He really, really annexes his neighboring Turkish beyliks. But he also is so powerful that the Byzantine ruler of the time becomes his vassal. And it's considered to be just a matter of, a few years that he's going to conquer Constantinople. He defeats this major crusader group at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. And then a very famous Central Asian conqueror, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, appears on the scene, and he defeats Bayezid, and it looks like the Ottomans are going to be wiped off the scene, and there won't be Ottomans again. The story is that Timur puts Bayezid in an iron cage for a number of years. I don't know if that's true, but there's a lot of nice pictures of that because, it's a good story. But we have a number of years where it looks like the Ottomans have just disappeared from the scene. And then one of Bayezid's sons is able to start putting things back together. And by the time we get to Bayezid, the first great-grandson, Mehmed II, who reigns from 1451 to 1481, the Ottomans truly become an empire at this point. And if you can see this picture of Mehmed II, this is a picture by an Ottoman artist. You can see he's smelling a rose. The Ottomans are very into flowers. And if you look at my scarf here, you can see I have Turkish tulips on my scarf. Yeah, you can see those. So the Ottomans really love their flowers. So Mehmed II, here he is, he's smelling the roses, but he is known as the Conqueror, mainly because he conquers Constantinople, but he conquers a lot of other territories as well. He built Topkapı Saray, which I'm sure you're going to go see. It's the most amazing museum. It was his palace, the second one he built in Istanbul after he conquered the city. And it's full of wonderful treasures, including this wonderful dagger with emeralds in the hilt. And there was this really cheesy movie that was made in like 1960 or something called Topkapı. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's really a good laugh, you know, and it's about them, a group of thieves trying to steal this dagger. So look out for the dagger when you go to Topkapı. So one of the things that Mehmed did is he's Muslim. When he conquers the city, he turns the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. And it's a mosque for a number of years, and then it becomes a museum, and now it's a mosque again. But I'm assuming that you're still going to figure out some way to get inside. I think it should still be a museum, but Erdogan does not consult me for his policy. So there you go. But anyway, Mehmed created a very cosmopolitan empire with he attracted a lot of artists from Europe, and this is a model of Topkapı Saray. Saray means palace. This is the second court, and this is the first court, and this is the harem. The first court is now what's the parking lot for the museum. So it gives you an idea how truly huge this was. And all these chimneys are chimneys of what were once kitchens, because not only did a number of people live here, also people would come here and work for the day and would eat while they were there. And so it's really a large, beautiful space with the most beautiful setting in the world. So I'm not prejudiced or anything, I guess. Okay, so this is the entrance to the second courtyard. In fact, the gate where you show your tickets and then you go into the palace. And this is a portrait of Mehmed II. It's a different portrait than the one you saw by an Ottoman artist. This is a portrait by Bellini, a Venetian painter who came to Istanbul to paint the ruler. And you can see, we don't see him smelling any roses here. There's all these attributes of sovereignty, right? You see the crowns, the arch, the elaborate brocade, the fur collar, to give this impression of great power. So Mehmed the Conqueror was followed by his son Bayezid II, and there was a big succession dispute between Bayezid II and his brother Cem. With the Ottomans, it wasn't like the eldest son was the automatic prince who would inherit. It was whichever prince was able to defeat his brothers, and by that means was able to demonstrate that he had the most power, then this would be the one who would rule after the death of his father. So Jim actually appears in one of the chapters of my Allies with the Infidel book, because when he is defeated in battle, he goes to Rhodes, and I heard some people talking about Rhodes, and he asks the knights for help, and they say, yes, we'll help you, but instead they send him to France, where he's a captive in France, and then eventually he's sent to Rome so that the head of the Knights of Rhodes can become a cardinal. There was a little deal making going on there. And he's actually in Rome until a French king invades the Italian peninsula and captures him. And he actually dies with the French king when the French king is trying to capture Naples. So it's quite a dramatic story. So Bayezid was very much involved with naval issues. He strengthened the Ottoman Navy so much that he was able to defeat Venice, which was the major naval power of the time, in a naval war. And so his reign is a period of consolidation after his father had conquered a lot of territory. And then following him is another person who conquers a lot of territory, and show you that in a minute. So I want you to see this mosque. This is Bayezid's mosque in Istanbul. You're probably not going to go see it. It's not one of the masterpieces. I'm not sure you're going to see all the masterpieces that you should, but but you'll notice there's a dome, and it's a pretty big dome, but we're going to see much bigger domes that get built by a famous Ottoman architect. But one of the things that rulers do is they build a big mosque complex, usually in Istanbul, but sometimes in other cities as well. So here's a picture of Cem Sultan, and this picture is actually at the Vatican. So you can see this is Cem right here.
I'm sorry, they're letting me know on the internet that they can't see your mouse pointer. So use your mouse pointer, but go ahead and do some descriptive stuff so they can kind of figure out online.
Okay, so in this particular painting, which is in the Vatican, it's a picture of Cem, who is the Pope's captive at this point. And I don't know if you've heard of the Borgia Pope. Yes, right. This is Cem at in Rome at the Borgia court, and he's wearing a turban, and he's kind of wearing a white robe that's got patterns, and then he's got a turban. And you see there's another person with a turban on a horse. That's one of the Pope's sons. You might be like, the Pope has sons? Yeah, we're not going to get into that. But
you can use the mouse pointer, just know that you also have to describe it.
Okay, so this is the son who is here, who is dressing up in a Turkish style, and then this is supposed to be Cem himself. And maybe this is Lucretia. She's famous too. So, yeah. Okay, so Selim is the son of Bayezid, and he is actually his youngest son. And he decides he doesn't like his father's policies. He deposes his father, defeats all of his brothers, and he only reigns for 8 years, but wow, does he do a lot in those 8 years. So he defeats the Safavids of Iran at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. This is really important because this kind of solidifies control of Eastern Turkey for the Ottomans. And then, like 2 years later, he defeats the Mamluks, who are the rulers of Egypt and Syria, and he defeats them and then adds, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Arabia to the Ottoman Empire. So greatly increases its size. And this is the first time that the Ottomans actually have more Muslims than Christians in their empire, because he adds all these like core territories that have been long-term Muslim areas to the empire. So this is actually the first time there's more Muslims than Christians in the empire. So he rules short period, but has a big impact on how big the empire is and its components. This is a picture of him at the Battle of Chaldiran. So the Ottomans used muskets and cannon, and the Safavids were like, oh, only sissies do that. And the Ottomans are like, yep, watch us win. So they did. Sometimes people will refer to the empires during this period as gunpowder empires, and the Ottomans definitely used cannon and muskets. So one of the most famous rulers of the Ottoman Empire, and he's one whose reign I have focused a lot on in my work, is Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, the longest reign of any sultan. He conquered Rhodes. Mehmed tried to conquer Rhodes and didn't succeed, so it just shows, how good Suleiman was. He also conquered Belgrade. He expanded into Hungary in 1526, which brought him into direct conflict with Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Spain. And at this point, Suleiman makes an alliance with Francis I of France. And if you're interested in this, I can recommend a book on this. It's called Allies with the Infidel. And it's by the famous author Christine Isom-Verhaaren. And so what we see in this picture here is the Ottoman fleet helping the French conquer the city of Nice. And I have a little story with this. I guess I have time. With the publisher, I was like, well, there's this picture I really want. And they're like, oh, well, I don't know, because our board really wants this picture. And I'm like, isn't this amazing? We both want the same picture. So that was not a difficult negotiation for that one. So Suleiman is very much involved in European affairs during this period. He is, as I said, making this alliance with Francis I of France, and he is in constant conflict with Charles V, because Charles V keeps saying, I'm the king of Jerusalem. And Suleiman is like, no, you're not. I actually rule Jerusalem. So I don't know if any of you have been to Jerusalem that are here. The walls of the old city, those are the accomplishment of Suleiman. He was the one, he wasn't personally the one who came to Jerusalem and built the walls, but he paid for the walls on Jerusalem. And he also paid to redo the tile work on the Dome of the Rock. So he left his mark on Jerusalem. So as well as, besieging Vienna and making alliances with France, he's also very much involved in trying to do a lot of building to make his empire stronger and more beautiful. Oh, all right. Can we go back? So I was leaving. Some friends of my husband said, are you going to wear a turban? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to wear a turban. But there you see quite a turban on Suleiman. And, and one of the things I found out is that actually he would have had his head shaved. It's kind of like, from the time of the American Revolution, you see all those people in wigs. They actually had shaved heads. They did, in order to wear a wig or a turban like this, you have to shave your own hair. So I'm not going to do that. So, but it is quite the turban. So, all right. So Suleiman, among his other conquests, he conquered Iraq. He is known as Kanuni by the Ottomans, the Magnificent by Europeans, but Kanuni, the lawgiver, by Ottomans. And he has this wonderful love story. So the usual pattern is that sultans have concubines. They don't actually have wives. They have concubines, and they have one child, one son per concubine, and then they move on. And Suleiman had done that, and then he met Harem, and he fell in love with her, and then he was totally faithful to her for the rest of his life. And they had like 5 children together, boom, 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 boom. We have a change in the pattern of how the succession works as a result of this relationship. This is Suleiman's Tura, and a Tura is a stylized signature. So this says Suleiman. Can you all read that? Certainly, right? Even if you knew Arabic script, you'd be like, of course that says Suleiman, you know. But you can see how beautifully intricate this work is. And this is the sort of official, more or less like a seal that would go on important documents. So I actually saw an example of this on a document. I actually saw it at the Library of Congress because they had an exhibit of manuscripts from the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, and it was sent by Suleiman to Francis I. So it was just really amazing. So this is Suleiman's bas-relief in the U.S. House of Representatives, and you might be like, what? But remember, he's a lawgiver, right? So at the House of Representatives, where law is made, then of course you want notable figures associated with law that you can consider while you consider making laws yourself. So here is Suleiman at the House of Representatives. So I know when you are in Istanbul, you will go to the Hippodrome. And at the Hippodrome, you will see some of the things that you see in this picture. Here's a procession of guilds, but you will see an obelisk from Egypt. You will see this 3-headed, it's bronze with serpents, and this kind of broken column. So remember this picture when you're at the Hippodrome and you see these. So this was an area that had, from Byzantine time, was open space for like athletic events, and the Ottomans used it for processions and things like that. So, and here's a picture of Suleiman and Hayreddin, and Suleiman is on the big throne, and Hayreddin is sitting at all, which is amazing. That's because he was elderly at this point, but he is the most famous admiral of the 16th century. Not just the most famous Ottoman admiral, but the most famous admiral. And everybody wanted to claim him as one of theirs. And so here he is consulting with the ruler. And so because of his status, he was allowed to sit. So during the reign of Suleiman, a certain person called Sinan, who was recruited through what's called the Devshirme, which is like peasant boys in the empire, and he became a military engineer. But when he was 50 years old, he starts building mosques, and then for the next 50 years, he builds mosques. So he lives to be 100 and builds some of the most famous mosques, which you will at least see the skyline if you don't actually go to the Süleymaniye. I don't know whether you're going to the Süleymaniye or not. That's the best mosque in Istanbul. Yeah, okay. And so the Süleymaniye is his most famous mosque in Istanbul, and you're not going to see that except from in a distance. So it's on the top of a hill, and so you will definitely see it because, you know, it's the most prominent mosque on the skyline. And you can see it has a much bigger dome than Bayezid's dome, right? As compared to the rest of the building, the dome is much bigger. And so this is one of his masterpieces, the Süleymaniye. Now, Suleiman's son was another Selim. He only rules for a few years, doesn't really do much, but the Ottomans do conquer Cyprus during this period. But, and here's him, you can see he's kind of plump. He's known as Selim the Sot. So not exactly as great as being the Magnificent, but there you go. But he has the most beautiful mosque in the world, and you won't see it because it's in Edirne, and I'm sure you're not going to Edirne. But Sinan's goal in life was to build a dome that was bigger than the dome of the Hagia Sophia, and he did that when he built the dome of the Selimiyah, which is in Edirne. And here's a picture of it. And the picture doesn't do it justice at all. It's like it kind of floats in the air. I know you probably think I sound silly, but it's really amazing. And then inside, it's just incredibly, incredibly beautiful. So not many people do see this. I am one of the lucky few because most people don't go to Edirne. But okay, then we arrive at the 17th century, and this is where I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. In case you think I've been dawdling, we're going to go faster now. This is a period of crisis in all Eurasia. It's known as the crisis of the 17th century. You have lots of unrest. You have an English civil war. You have civil wars in France. It's a very difficult period for the Ottomans. There's a lot of financial dislocation, perhaps because of inflation, which of course we couldn't relate to at all. Military expenses skyrocketed during this period. And there are a lot of changes in the world economy, and people are trying to figure out, what's the best way to deal with all these changes with the economy during this period of the 17th century. So this is a mosque I think you will see. It's called the Blue Mosque, but its official name is the Mosque of Sultan Ahmet. And so the area of Istanbul where it's built is called Sultan Ahmet. And Topkapi is right there, and so is Hagia Sophia. So it's a really nice mosque. Not quite as good as the Suleymaniye, but it's a really nice one. And it's located by all of the other main attractions that I'm sure you'll be seeing. You'll also notice here all the tulips, right? Tulips originate in like Central Asia, Iran area. And actually the Dutch get them when they're trading with the Ottomans and take them to the Netherlands. So you will enjoy seeing this mosque. It's really beautiful. So how many of you like Turkish soap operas? Actually, there was a series called The Magnificent Century made about Suleyman and Harem that was really popular worldwide. And here is the second kind of version of it when we have, it's called Kusem, and Kusem was the consort of Ahmed I, and she outlives him by like 30 years or something. And so it's about her and her power as the queen mother in the 17th century. She dies in 1651, so she has a lot of power for a long time period, and she has a number of children. So if you ever need something to do, I think you can watch these things on YouTube. And sometimes they even have, they're either dubbed or they've got English subtitles. So, yeah. So women are actually pretty important in the Ottoman Empire. The Queen Mother, Kusem, wrote a letter to the Grand Vizier. This is in 1627. So basically, it's important to know these women were literate. They may have been secluded, but nevertheless, they knew everything that was going on, and they were directing affairs in the empire. So this is evidence of this here. So I'm moving along. I'm moving like 50 years on to Ahmed III, who reigned at the beginning of the 18th century. And this period is known as the Tulip period, or in Turkish, the Lale Devri. So an example of the kind of architecture that you might see, it's kind of like an Ottoman kind of Baroque. This is a fountain that was built by Ahmed III in this particular style. So now I'm really moving along quickly here to Selim III. So we had Selim I, amazing, conquered lots of territory. Selim II, not so much. Selim III is known for trying to do a lot of reforms, but not very successfully. He gets deposed and is really not successful in making a lot of changes. But he's noted for his attempts to do this. He has followed there's a little brief period in between by a cousin of his, Mehmed II, who reigns from 1808 to 1839. And if you compare how he's dressed to how Selim III is dressed, you might notice there's quite a big difference. So you see, if you want to go back, and you go, I guess I can go back, but see, the kind of the long robe, the turban in Selim III, and then if you go to Mehmed II, he's wearing very European type of clothing. Yeah, he does have a fez on, but other than that, he looks pretty European. This portrait was painted by a French painter and is actually at Versailles, outside of Paris. And so you can see the kind of the French influence. And so he makes a lot of changes. He's like, the Janissaries, they're not effective anymore. Selim III tried to get rid of him. They deposed him. And so I'm going to get rid of the Janissaries. And he does that by bombarding their barracks. Pretty effective, right? And so then he is able to change his army. So that's Mehmed II. His son is Abdul-Majid II, and he reigns during a period that begins in 1839, known as the Tanzimat. And this is where we have a lot of enormous changes. And sometimes this is said, oh, the Ottomans, they're just so influenced by Europe, but they're aware of a lot of trends. And so they're trying to say, okay, what should we do to be able to make our empire to be stronger, more powerful than it is being during this period. So it's actually during this period that the Russian ruler calls the Ottoman Sultan the sick man of Europe. But it's important to remember which dynasty lasted longer and which was able to sail away from Istanbul and which got shot in a room in Siberia, right? So who was really the sick man? That's the question. So we get to Abdul Hamid II, and he reigns for a number of years near the end of the empire. This picture is actually a portrait, a photo taken of him at Balmoral. You all know Balmoral, right? And so there's a saying, just because you are paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you. And so he was paranoid, but they were out to get him. So yeah, you could see he's not does not look happy in that picture, does he? So toward the end of his reign, we have what's known as the Young Turk Revolution in 1908, when a group of army officers mainly say, we don't like the policies of the ruler. He's not giving us the money we need to improve our military. We're losing wars. We need to take over power ourselves. We don't actually get rid of the dynasty, but we do take power. And so it's the Young Turks who take power in 1908, and they rule the empire through World War I. Okay, so we have a sultan who's a figurehead. So Abdul Hamid is involved in a counter coup, and they get one of his cousins and say, what do you think about being the next sultan? And he's like, I haven't read a newspaper in 40 years. And they're like, you're the man for us. So, they take over, and it's the Young Turks who decide to, for good reasons, actually, to make an alliance with Germany, because with friends like the French and the British were taking over Ottoman territory, with friends like those, who needs enemies? So they do make an alliance with Germany, but as it turns out, that is not the best option, as it turns out, in World War I. So this is a picture of various scenes at Gallipoli. You going to Gallipoli? Pretty close to Troy. Going to Troy? Okay, Gallipoli is very close to Troy. So I just have to tell you my little Gallipoli story. The first time I went to Gallipoli was, I think it was April 25th. And that happens to be Anzac Day, which happens to be the day that the Australians and New Zealanders made their landing at Gallipoli. And in fact, it is now, the Australian and New Zealand, basically their 4th of July. It's where they're like, we really aren't the same as the British, because they used us as cannon fodder at Gallipoli. So, when my family and I were on the ferry, it was full of Australians, because they were, it was this anniversary day and they were all going to Gallipoli. So, very important battle. And it is a battle that the Ottomans defeated the Allies at the Battle of Gallipoli. And here we see famous individual Mustafa Kemal, which is where he comes to prominence, is at the Battle of Gallipoli. You can see, here are the straits. You can see various British warships getting sunk. You can see the landing at Gallipoli was the biggest landing until D-Day, biggest amphibious landing. Here's Ottoman soldiers having a good time, waiting to be killed at Gallipoli. And, basically it was a mini Western front at Gallipoli. So Mustafa Kemal, you don't want to forget that name, right? Because he is going to become Ataturk, and you are going to be becoming very familiar with Ataturk's picture and statues as you go to Istanbul, and I'm sure you'll go to Taksim, and then go down Istiklal Caddesi and go shopping, right? That's the best place to go shopping. So this is Ataturk. Mustafa Kemal, he takes the surname of Ataturk, which means father of the Turks. And this is a picture of him with his wife, Latifa Hanım. But pretty soon in his policies, he's going to get rid of fezzes, and he's going to encourage women not to wear hijab, and is going to make a lot of major changes in Turkey. He is the one who, after World War I, fights back against the Allies, is successful, gets a renegotiated treaty, and then founds the Republic of Turkey. And that's when the Ottoman Sultan is able to sail away, and the last Ottoman dies in New York City. So that's the Ottoman Empire, and I did that pretty quickly. So you might have questions because I did that so quickly. So if you have some questions, I should actually go back to the title here of The Lord of the Two Lands and the Two Seas. Is the Ottomans, the two lands are like the Balkans and Anatolia. So they were always ruling in Europe as well as in Asia. And the two seas were the Aegean and the Black Sea that they controlled. So very important. So,
Let me ask, with the succession,
yes.
how did Suleiman the Magnificent change the order of succession?
So the pattern would have been, he already had one son by a concubine, that he would have had one son with Harem, and then he would have moved on to another woman and had another son, and then moved on to another woman and had another son, just.
And then they would poison each other.
Oh, well, no, they wouldn't. They'd fight battles. But Suleiman really wanted one of his sons by Harem to succeed him. And his first son actually died of natural causes. And then Suleiman was worried about his eldest son trying to depose him because, that had happened to Suleiman's grandfather. So he was executed, that son. And then Suleiman basically put his kind of influence and military power behind one of his remaining sons by Harem. So.
But how did that affect the subsequent succession?
Well, after that, there was kind of always, even though where there were a number of sons, they would have one son who was considered to be the heir. And then eventually, and then there was a period where there were still a lot of sons, so then they would execute all the other sons, some of whom were very young children, and that people didn't really like that because it seems kind of
So was it kind of
bloody. So I'm not quite done yet. So, and so then they decide all of the princes are just going to stay in the harem. So the harem was not just for women, it was also for the Sultan's family. All the sons will stay in the harem until and then it's the eldest member of the dynasty who will succeed. So not necessarily father to son, but whoever is the eldest male member of the dynasty. So I'm assuming you're going to go see the harem when you're in Topkapi. And so they talk about the conquests, the princes being in the cage. So it's not a literal cage. It's like a gilded cage in the sense that you're basically under house arrest in a palace.
And would they just stay there? They
Yeah.
never leave ever for the rest of their life?
Until they became the Sultan.
Okay, unless everybody else died, then they would be.
Yeah. So.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the with respect to the writing, dress, political, social reforms?
Okay, so he very much, and this is really important, Ataturk was born in the city of Salonika, which is now Thessaloniki. I always have a harder time with the Greek name than the Turkish one, in Greece. And so he was from this part of the empire. Salonika was a very cosmopolitan area. It had a huge Jewish population. The Jews, when they were expelled from Spain, most of them came and settled in the Ottoman Empire, and Salonika had this huge Jewish population until World War II, when the Greek government sent them to the concentration camps. So, so it was a very cosmopolitan city with a lot of Christians, a lot of Jews, as well as Muslims, a lot of influence. And so this is the background that Ataturk came from. And he wanted, once he ended up with the Republic of Turkey, which didn't include any of that territory anymore, he wanted to kind of remake the rest of Turkey to be more like his hometown. And so he was very well educated. And also did a lot of reading. And so he changed the law code. He encouraged people to change their dress. Like the fez had become popular with Mahmud II, but with Ataturk, it's like you've got to wear a brimmed hat. He also closed the Sufi lodges. He had the call to prayer be given in Turkish rather than in Arabic. It's now back to Arabic and has been for a long time, but he was concerned about the low rate of literacy. And so he changed the alphabet from the Arabic script to a modified Latin alphabet. So it's actually pretty easy to read the signs in Turkey. You may not pronounce the words correctly, but you can at least read them, right? And so he made those changes. He promoted a lot of opportunities for women, education. Women got the vote in Turkey before they did in France, as a matter of fact. He didn't have any children of his own, but he adopted a lot of young women to be his daughters. And one of them became like a famous female pilot. And so he really encouraged a lot of different changes. Now, one of the issues is this was pretty top down. And so there's, kind of a question about how deep did those changes go, right? Because there were definitely a lot of people who didn't like his policies and his ideas. So when you go to Istanbul, depending on where you go, you might see, usually visitors from the Gulf countries are the ones who are really covered, but there's kind of all versions of, scarves, raincoats, that's not a Turkish thing, the little slits. That's, as I said, those are usually visitors from Arabia, Saudi Arabia. And I have seen the shortest skirts I've ever seen in my life in Istanbul too, in some neighborhoods. So you can see everything, right? There are the most beautiful scarves in the world. In Turkey, I have a big collection of Turkish scarves. This is one I bought last summer when I was in Istanbul. So a lot of the women, they will totally cover their hair, but with these really incredibly beautiful scarves, right? But you'll see really a wide variety of dress from women especially. So did I cover all of those things?
One other thing that I think is interesting is the way that he made these affirmative efforts to change the language, transforming it so that you tried to change the words that they were using.
So this is actually very common, not just in Turkey, not just in the Middle East at this time, because this is where we really have the rise of nationalism to like a huge extent is post-World War I. And so in Persian, they try and get rid of Turkish and Arabic words. In Turkish, they try and get rid of Arabic and Persian words, and in Arabic they try and get rid of Turkish and Persian words because there'd been a lot of borrowing between those languages. And so it's not just Turkey. It's very common in a lot of areas where we're going to get back to our pure language. We're going to get rid of all of these these words. And for me, because I read Ottoman, I'm actually not so great with modern Turkish, but I read Ottoman. It's kind of like English, which is such a rich language because we have many different vocabulary words for the same word that are taken from like French or other languages, right? And that's Ottoman is like that, right? It's got this very rich vocabulary of all these different words. When you kind of get rid of a lot of those, it really makes the language not as, I don't know, rich as it was before. But it's not like, it's something that's very common with the rise of nationalism. It's like, we want to get back to this pure language, which is kind of funny because Mihrimah is actually an Arabic word, but that is the word everybody uses in Turkey to say hello, right? But it's actually, and some people say, no, we don't use those Arabic words. We say merhaba. And it's like, well, merhaba is actually an Arabic word, but yeah. So it's not by any means complete, but yes, there was a big push that way. So, yeah.
You mentioned the Dershima.
Oh, the Devshirme?
Yeah, Dershima.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, so the Ottomans, as I was saying, they had this very diverse population. They had a lot of peasants that were Christian peasants. And so they periodically would go to the villages and would select a few of the best kind of teenagers, male teenagers, to bring to Istanbul to educate, to become their military and their administrators. So one of the individuals I said I was going to talk about today, and I haven't yet, so it's my opportunity, is Suleiman had a number of sons, but he only had one daughter, and his daughter's name was Mihrimah, and she was married to one of Suleiman's grand viziers, which means his head administrator. And this man had been recruited from Bosnia, where he was a swineherd. So in the Ottoman system, we have a lot of individuals who were recruited from these kind of very modest backgrounds. They're brought in, they're educated, they build this really strong bond with the ruler and with the other individuals who are part of this group, and they become the administrators of the empire. And as far as the concubines go, by the time you get to, the last Ottoman who dies in New York, most of the women who are brought in to be the concubines are also not Turkish. And so there's this tiny little bit of Turkish DNA, and then there's a lot of other DNA. So for instance, Hürrem, that I mentioned, she was actually captured in Ukraine. So if you go to Ukraine, there are statues of Hürrem there, as like the most famous Ukrainian that I know of is Hürrem, right? And then there's Italian women who are brought in, Greek women, women from the Caucasus. And so there's this very, within the dynasty itself, there's a lot of diversity. Within the ruling class, there's a lot of diversity. People have to learn Turkish. They have to officially convert. But at what level people are converting, that's a big question as well.
So you mentioned the Janissaries, so there's this elite fighting for
The Devshirme.
right, and weren't they usually Christian, and weren't they usually kind of like captured from successful battles?
No, usually they're from the Devshirme, which means they're recruited from the peasants within the empire, but they're recruited from Christian peasants within the empire. Well, I mean, what I mean is the Devshirme, that they're taken from the villages. And so some of the parents didn't like this, but some of the parents thought it was the greatest thing that ever happened because their child might become the Grand Vizier. And so we have various instances where we have in families, we have the Grand Vizier who's a Muslim and he has a brother who's a Christian. So one of the famous people I talk about in this book is called Jigalizadeh, and he's of Genoese descent, but lives in Sicily. His father actually got his mother from a Ottoman fortress. So he's actually, I suppose, half Ottoman. But he and his father are captured. Jigalizadeh, which means son of Jigala. Jigala is an Italian name. Is then educated in the Ottoman palace. And he eventually marries a great-granddaughter of Suleiman. So there are some instances of people being captured, but it's more people being recruited within the empire. And so, yes, some people are like, oh, it's awful, my child is being taken away. And other people are like, yeah, but he might become the richest person in the empire after the Sultan, as opposed to being a swineherd.
And the basic reason for this is so there's not nepotism, or they have their loyalty to the Sultan rather than to family situations.
Yes, so I don't know how clearly that came through, but yes, this is the idea, is not to have an aristocracy, but to have these people that are all of their position is basically dependent on the ruler, and so they're totally loyal to the ruler, and so that, and then you don't have to worry about having kind of this aristocracy that might not actually be very intelligent or talented, because you bring these people in, the best of them are the ones who rise to the top.
Okay, so let's say teşekkürler to Professor Isom-Verhaaren. Thank you very much.